What's up, guys? Welcome to the Metal Roofing Channel. I'm Thad Barnette. Today we're looking at a metal market update. It's January 2026. We're right at the end of January, recording this on the 28th. So I wanted to give you guys a heads up of what's going on in the market during Q1 here. And I've got Melissa, our Director of Supply Chain at Sheffield Metals, here to help me out. Thanks for being here, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're talking about, specifically the standing seam metal roofing market that Sheffield and Sheffield's customers kind of play in, and what material is doing right now in the marketplace. So let's start with steel and kind of give me an overview of what's happening in the steel market these days.
The steel market, the prices continue to rise at the mills. Domestic steel production's up slightly from where it was in December, and this is kind of the highest output that we've seen in the last several months. Automotive assemblies are down, which indicates that they have stronger demand towards the end of the year and should open up some capacity for construction markets. Maintenance and increased activity have driven to some of those lead time constraints that we're seeing in the market, and it certainly created some inventory constraints for those of us that are buying from the steel mills on a regular basis.
Yeah, so how does that impact the lead time from the mills right now?
The lead times have pushed out slightly. There was also a pretty significant backlog with the combination of maintenance and outages that were occurring in December at the amount of orders that were coming in. We've seen some backlog, which has been a struggle for some of us to get our steel in on time during January. And we're starting to see some of that relief, but it's certainly contributed to some of the constraints in the market.
Okay, and we'll talk about in a little bit how this affects our customers' day-to-day work schedule, lead times, things like that. But what other factors are taking place in the market right now that's affecting material?
We're seeing the construction demand increase a little bit, and I think those are good indicators as we start to see the interest rates in the U.S. create a little bit of relief. It's giving us some signals that we should start to see more demand come in, and the mills are feeling that as well. It'll be important for us to follow the market pretty closely over the next couple of weeks to see how the demand plays in, because there is some sentiment right now that it's touch and go, and pretty difficult for us to navigate those waters until we see some market stabilization. Yeah,
we always say nobody has a crystal ball, especially in times like these.
Exactly.
So let's talk about inventories for a little bit. What are we paying attention to in terms of inventory?
We watch the inventory that's out there in the market, whether it be at a service center or somebody like ourselves. And we've seen generally through the end of 2025, most people have continued to have lean inventories. It wasn't worth the risk to carry high inventories with the way the market is. For the most part, people have started to lean back in, and that's some of the surge that you saw in December in January. And while we're still trying to bail out of some of those backlogs, you are going to start to see a little bit more inventory creep into the market over the next couple of months. You're also going to see some import relief potentially as folks start to weigh whether or not the constraints that we're seeing in the market are worth the risk to bring in imports and considering the tariffs and anti-dumping.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that you mentioned, before we started recording was weather and energy impacting the marketplace right now. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Energy costs continue to rise in the U.S. This is something that you're seeing every day on TV. But the most recent weather event that we had with the snow going across the country has contributed quite a bit to the power companies asking most of our supply chain partners to relieve energy consumption and gas consumption on the grid. You're starting to see some impacts of that in our supply chain within this week. And while we still think it's manageable, it's something we've got to keep an eye on. It'll certainly create a little bit of a ripple in the market.
So you're saying that could potentially impact pricing and lead times as well in the future?
Absolutely. It'll impact lead times. As always, we've got plenty of opportunity to go out and find solutions for most of our projects, but there will be some creative solutions out there that need to be talked about. For steel, I think that sums up the bulk of what we've got going on in the market right now. I would say that we will start to see some levelization through the end of January, which is today, and then the first part of February. But we know that the market's going to come back fairly strong as long as construction spending continues to go well. So we don't necessarily see any relief in the steel pricing in the next several months.
Yeah. And is that construction demand you're talking about both residential and commercial?
It is residential and commercial. We actually saw a stronger residential market at the end of Q4 than we did a commercial market. And now you're going to start to see commercial markets start to pick back up, especially those that have longer projects that they've quoted out there and they're starting to see steel prices increase. They're certainly trying to rush to get orders in, which is adding to that inventory constraint right now.
All right, so we talked about steel. Let's move over to the aluminum side of the market. What's happening here at the end of January?
Aluminum continues to be a market that has tight constraints. It's been a global deficit for many years, and 2026 is even a little bit worse, especially as we have some constraints here in the U.S. We're seeing 4-year highs for aluminum in the U.S., and this is a combination of where aluminum ingot values are as well as the premiums here in the U.S. Things contributing to that would still be operating costs, operating margins, as well as just global supply.
And when it comes to, the Sheffield Metals supply chain and the standing seam metal roofing supply chain, the base metal is not the only thing that contributes. So what else are we seeing in the marketplace aside from the base metal?
You're seeing other things in the market that are coming out. Our paint costs are rising, and this is across the board. It's not limited to one substrate. It's not limited to one paint vendor. There are operating costs that rise throughout the entire supply chain, and we're starting to feel that. And we also see this in our paint application costs as well. So across the board, our supply chain is becoming more and more volatile to some of these operating pressures that are out there in the U.S. economy today.
Yeah. And so when we think about the bottom line here in terms of a Sheffield Metals customer, what's the message, with that knowledge?
The message is really that we continue to see tight supply. We continue to see rising costs. We continue to see leading indicators that support increases in the market, trying to get those messages out as early as possible and make sure that we give you the information you need to protect yourself with escalation clauses. The best messaging we could offer as well is engage us as early as possible when you've got bid projects. We'd like to be a part of risk mitigation tactics with you, whether that be on cost or lead time. And we've got a variety of ways that you can work with your sales team to create some solutions for your projects.
Yep, 100%. And bottom line, stay close to your supplier, really utilize that partnership with the Sheffield Metals.
Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. If you have any questions, please comment down below. As always, I'm Thad Barnette here at the Metal Roofing Channel. We'll catch you next time.